topic today is strategy. You see, strategy is not about celebrating the past. It's not about celebrating the present. It's only about leadership in the future. Because an organization is a leader today, you cannot assume you will be a leader tomorrow. And earning that leadership is what strategy is all about. If strategy is about leadership in the future, one thing we know, every industry changes in the future. Therefore, if you want to be a leader in that future, you have to adapt to change. And another word for adapting to change is innovation. Therefore, I say strategy is innovation. If an organization is not doing innovation, they are not doing strategy, they're doing strategy equals leadership in the future, leadership in the future equals adapting to change equals innovation. Therefore, I assert strategy equals innovation. When I make a statement like this, typically executives ask me, is innovation needed in every industry? Can't we think of one industry which rarely changes? Therefore, adapting to change is not important. Therefore, innovation is not important. Executives typically point to one industry where they think innovation is not needed. This is the industry I am part of. Academics. People always say, come on, universities, they don't innovate, they don't have to change, they don't have to adapt. Let me ask you a simple question. Suppose we prepared the list of the top 10 universities in the world 100 years ago. Out of that list, how many of them would be American universities, you think? If you guess the answer is 0, that's the right answer. Not even the mighty Harvard was in the top 10. Do you know which country had the most number of universities in the top 10 100 years ago? It turns out to be Germany. UK is a good guess, Oxford, Cambridge, but it turned out to be Germany. Germany had 6 of the top 10 universities in the world. If the university industry was a static industry and there was absolutely no breakthrough innovation in the university industry for the last 100 years, and if you're preparing the list of the top 10 today, the list has got to be identical. And one thing we know, the list is completely turned upside down. There is not a single German university on that list today. And it is populated with American universities, the Harvards and the MITs and the Stanfords of the world. If we have time, we can do an analysis. What kinds of breakthrough innovations did American universities pull off in the last 100 years to become the leaders in higher education today? Certainly, they innovated the product. Product for a university would be the curriculum. But breakthrough innovation is possible in non-product areas, in what I call the complete business model. As an example of a non-product area where American universities did breakthrough innovation would be control over alumni. Cultivating alumni relations is an American game changer. Today, Harvard, MIT, Stanford are clearly global leaders in higher education. That does not mean they can simply assume they will remain a leader in the future. Just like the way German universities couldn't simply assume 100 years ago they will remain a leader forever. You have to earn that leadership. That is what strategy is all about. Think about some of the breakthrough experiments American universities are doing today so that they can remain a leader in the future. In the last 24 months or so, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, they have put all their courses online. And MIT has gone one step further and is doing a breakthrough innovation experiment. And that is, if you take the MIT engineering courses that are offered online, and if you're willing to subject yourself to the same rigorous tests that are given to the MIT students who come on campus, you will get an MIT degree. Don't tell me this doesn't have the potential to fundamentally transform higher education going forward. If strategy is about leadership in the future, whenever I work with organizations, I ask them a very simple question. Think about all the things you do today and ask yourself, out of all the activities I am doing today, how many of them will make me a leader in the future? If that is what strategy is all about. And another way I can say the same thing is, whenever I work with companies, I tell them, think about all the projects you're executing today and put them in 3 boxes. How many of the activities you're pursuing today will be in box 1? And box 1 is about manage the present. It's about improve the performance of your businesses the way they are constructed today. How many of your activities are in box 2? And box 2 is about selectively forget the past. And how many of your activities are in box 3? And box 3 is about create the future. Manage the present, box 1. Selectively abandon the past, box 2. And create the future, box 3. And what I find working with organizations is organizations way over focus on box 1. And then they think they're doing strategy. As I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, strategy has nothing to do with the past. It's got nothing to do with the present. It's got very little to do with box 1. Strategy has a lot to do with box 2 and box 3. And the challenge for organizations in box 3 is, how are you going to create your future in the year 2027? And if you want to create your future in the year 2027, then you have a job to do in box 2. Namely, you have to selectively forget. Let me clarify one thing right away. Strategy for any organization, it includes MIT, it includes General Electric, is about becoming a leader in the year 2027. That's what strategy is all about. But strategy is not about what you have to do in the year 2027. It is very much about the projects you are executing today across the 3 boxes, so that you intersect with the year 2027. How are you allocating resources today? How is the organization energy focused today across the 3 boxes, so that you stay relevant in the next decade? Another word for box 1 is competition for the present. And competition for the present is all about efficiency. Another word for box 2, box 3 is competition for the future. And competition for the future is all about breakthrough innovation. Of course, both competition for the present and competition for the future are equally important. Therefore, strategy is always about how do you create your future while managing the present. How do you shape the evolution of year 2027 when you are squarely executing projects in the year 2017? If you want an example, imagine the year is 1903. Imagine you are in Boston and you have to go to London. There is only one way you can make that trip. That is by a ship. And the ship took about 45 days to make the trip. Suppose we wanted to go faster than 45 days. What would we have done? One thing we would have done is call a shipbuilders association, study the ship, increase the engine speed, study the weather conditions on the ocean. This is what I call box 1 challenge. This is about continuously improving the performance of a system that you fully understand. By the way, 100 years of doing that, the fastest ship today will take at least 6 days to cross the Atlantic. In the year 1903, Wright brothers focused on competition for the future. And Wright brothers asked a fundamentally different question. Is it possible to completely avoid the ground? Is there a fundamentally different paradigm in travel? Today, a plane takes 5 hours to do a cross-Atlantic trip. Of course, improving the performance of the ship is important, but in the year 1903, you should also think about, how do I invent that future? Because however much you improve the performance of the present, it's never going to catch up with these non-linear business models, with these breakthrough business models. However much you improve the efficiency of the ship, you'll never catch up with the speed of the plane. This is the central challenge for organizations. How do I simultaneously excel in the present, but also invent that future? And the reason why this is a challenge is the thinking process and the execution methodologies you need in box 1 are fundamentally different than the thinking process and the execution methodologies you need in box 2, box 3. Yet, in the year 2017, you better execute box 1 projects. But in the year 2017, you better have breakthrough box 2, box 3 experiments, just like the way MIT is doing one, which will unlock the future. Yet they require different capabilities, different metrics, different processes, different organization. This is the central strategic challenge. In fact, what I'm going to tell you in these 90 minutes is a very, very simple message. Because it is simple to say does not mean it is easy to do. In fact, what I'm going to describe to you is nothing but common sense. But common sense is never common practice. And my common sense message is future is now. Future is never about what you have to do in that future. And the reason why this is so hard is today I have 2 jobs to do. One job is in box 1. Another job is in box 2, box 3, inventing that future. Yet there are inherent conflicts, inherent paradoxes, inherent tensions between these 2 activities. This is the central leadership challenge. Let me take a minute and highlight for you what the fundamental difference is between box 1 projects on the one hand and box 2, box 3 on the other. Competition for the present projects, box 1 projects, are always in response to what I call clear signals and linear changes in your industry. Because you're responding to clear signals and linear changes in your industry, the organizational response would be incremental improvements in your current business model. Call it Six Sigma quality. Call it continuous process improvement. Call it operational excellence. These are all powerful ideas, but they are box 1 ideas. Competition for the future projects, box 2, box 3 projects, are always in response to what I call weak signals and nonlinear changes in your industry. Because you're responding to nonlinear changes in the industry, the organizational response would be breakthrough innovation, exponential innovation, step change, nonlinear innovation. Now, what might be an example of a nonlinear change in the industry which gave rise to nonlinear innovation? If you want to look at the last 2 decades or so, I would say the internet itself was a nonlinear change. Why? Because nonlinear changes will give rise to breakthrough business models. Concepts like Airbnb, Uber would not be possible without a discontinuation called the internet. Now, for organizations looking at the next decade, what would be the nonlinear changes that could be the basis on which organizations can launch breakthrough box 3 business models? Certainly, disruptive technologies will transform every industry, for sure. But technology is not the only source of nonlinear changes. There could be huge customer discontinuities. Customers of the future could be fundamentally different than the customers of the present. If they are fundamentally different, they will also demand box 3 innovation. There could be non-traditional competitors who can come into your space and force you to remake yourself. Let me give you an example of a customer discontinuity, which is creating all kinds of box 3 opportunities for every organization. I'm talking about emerging markets like India and China. If you're an American company, you can't take business models you created for the American consumer in box 1 and simply send them to India or China and hope to capture the markets in India and China. Why? Because emerging markets represents a huge customer discontinuity. Customers in emerging markets are fundamentally different than customers in developed markets. Because they are fundamentally different, they also demand exponential innovation. They demand nonlinear innovation. They demand box-free innovation. Now, why might this be true? Take, for instance, a simple statistic like per capita income. Per capita income in the US is $50,000. Per capita income in India is $1,500. And what that tells me is there is no business model you created for middle America, where the mass market per capita income is $50,000. You can simply send to India and hope to capture middle India, where the mass market per capita income is $1,500. You have to engage in box-free innovation. Here is an example of a company which did box-free innovation in India, thereby reaped rich rewards. The example I'm going to give is General Electric. This is one of the businesses of GE Healthcare. As you know, GE Healthcare, they make medical imaging equipment. This would be an X-ray machine, a CAT scanner, an MR machine, an ultrasound. And what you're seeing here is an electrocardiogram or an ECG machine. As you well know, ECG is the first point of diagnosis for heart attack. And GE innovated this machine for the American consumer. This is an extraordinarily powerful piece of equipment. This has saved lives. This has saved millions of American lives. Now, think for a moment, how is an American hospital structured? If you walk into an American hospital, what you are likely to find is a sophisticated imaging center. And in that sophisticated imaging center, you will have appliance-sized equipment. There will be a $1 million X-ray machine, $2 million CAT scanner, $3 million MR machine, and this ECG machine costs about $20,000. There will be a $20,000 ECG machine. And when the doctor asks the patient to go to the imaging center, the patient goes there. This is the way an American hospital is structured. I want you to shift the scene for a moment to India. Certainly GE sells this $20,000 ECG machine in India, for sure, to the top 10% of the economic pyramid. After all, there are going to be rich folks in poor countries, just like the way you have poor folks in rich countries. It may be a thin slice, but it exists. There are high-end hospitals even in India, the Apollos, the Manipals, the Fortis, who can afford to buy the high-end equipment. The question is, what about the remaining 90% of India? The remaining 90% of India cannot use this $20,000 ECG machine. Why? The first and the most obvious reason is affordability. You see, on this $20,000 ECG machine, a single ECG scan will cost $200. 90% of India, most of them live in rural India. And in rural India, people are making $2 a day, sometimes even less. Now, you can do the mental math. If I'm making $2 a day, and somebody is selling me an ECG scan for $200, I have to work for 100 days just to pay for one scan. That's only to determine whether I need further tests. I'm going to say, forget it. I can live with my chest pain. But affordability is not the only reason why 90% of Indians are non-consumers of this $20,000 ECG machine. Let's assume for a moment 90% of India is willing and able to pay the $200 per scan. It's not true, but let's make that assumption. Even then, 90% of India would be non-consumers of this $20,000 ECG machine. Why? You see, in rural India, there are no hospitals with sophisticated imaging centers. That means you can't ask the patient in rural India to go to the imaging center. The imaging center has to come door to door to the patient. That means somebody has got to take this $20,000 ECG machine door to door. Unfortunately, this $20,000 ECG machine weighs 500 pounds. If something weighs 500 pounds, I can't put it in my backpack and take it door to door. Suppose you manage to put it in a bus, and let's assume you're efficiently able to take it to 90% of India. It's impossible, but let's assume that. Let's also assume 90% of Indians are willing and able to pay the $200 per scan. Even then, 90% of Indians would be non-consumers of this $20,000 ECG machine. Why? You see, this $20,000 ECG machine works only on house current. As you well know, in rural India, electricity is either unavailable or unreliable. So even if you manage to take this machine to remote corners of India, maybe there is no electricity there to operate this piece of equipment. Suppose, let's assume, 90% of Indians are willing and able to pay the $200 per scan. And you have somehow efficiently taken this machine door to door. And let's also assume 90% of Indians have assured source of electricity. None of this is true, but let's make all these assumptions. Still, 90% of Indians would be non-consumers of this $20,000 ECG machine. Why? You see, this $20,000 ECG machine is an extraordinarily powerful piece of equipment. It can be operated only by trained doctors. It usually comes with a 500-page user's manual. Well, in rural India, there are no trained doctors. That means 90% of Indians cannot use this $20,000 ECG machine for a variety of reasons. That doesn't mean 90% of Indians don't suffer from heart attack. This is one of the main points that I want to drive home for you. Non-consumers in this world have exactly the same problem as consumers. Non-consumers have exactly the same needs as the consumers. Non-consumers have exactly the same aspiration as the consumers. The reason they are non-consumers is they cannot consume the business model you are giving to the consumers in box 1. If they could consume it, they would already become consumers. But if we can do breakthrough innovation, if we can think differently, if we can come up with out-of-the-box thoughts, if we can come up with exponential innovation, there is tremendous value you can unlock. In fact, today on planet Earth, there are 7 billion people. Out of the 7 billion people, only 1 billion have the purchasing power to buy the goods and services corporations make today. There are 6 billion non-consumers. Converting those 6 billion non-consumers into consumers, I say represent perhaps the single biggest growth opportunity. And bulk of those non-consumers are in poor countries like India. This is the biggest opportunity for Indian corporations. In 2008, when I went to work for GE, one of the very first projects we got involved in was to innovate this $100 ECG machine. On this $100 ECG machine, a single scan will cost 10 cents. If a single scan costs 10 cents, even if I'm making only $2 a day, if I got a severe chest pain, I am willing to allocate 10 cents for a scan. Not only that, this $100 ECG machine is extremely lightweight. It weighs less than a can of Coca-Cola. If something weighs less than a can of Coca-Cola, I can put it in my backpack and take it door to door. Not only that, this $100 ECG machine works on battery. On a single battery charge, it can produce 750 scans. Finally, this $100 ECG machine is extraordinarily simple to operate. Perhaps you can't quite see it on this slide. It has got only 2 buttons. There is a green button and then there is a red button. You push the green button, it works. You push the red button, it stops. As long as you know how to read traffic signs, you should be able to operate this machine. GE has converted a whole lot of non-consumers into consumers with this $100 ECG machine. Box 3 is about creating the market. Box 1 is a market share game. And both are important. By the way, everything that I'm describing to you is common sense, is common sense, is common sense, is common sense, is common